Rain has its own personality in this city. It doesn't fall politely. It presses, seeps, insists. From the wide windows of our hillside home, the skyline dissolves into a smear of silver and shadow, like a watercolor left out in the storm. I used to love that view. I used to think the rain meant safety. Today, it feels like surveillance. The house was too quiet for a weekday morning. No footsteps upstairs, no hum from the espresso machine. Just the slow tick of the wall clock and the soft hiss of rain sliding down the glass. I was cleaning because that's what I do when something feels wrong. Wipe, fold, straighten, pretend order can still be negotiated. That's when I found it. Not hidden, just misplaced. A single sheet of paper folded into quarters, slipped inside the side pocket of a briefcase that didn't belong to me. The paper was thin, clinical, covered in numbers and checkboxes that meant nothing until they meant everything. Positive, confirmed, infectious. My breath vanished, not rushed out, erased. I remember staring at the words as if they might rearrange themselves if I waited long enough. They didn't. They settled instead, heavy and final, like a verdict already delivered. The briefcase belonged to my son-in-law, and suddenly the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a container, sealed, quiet, dangerous. I thought of my daughter immediately, of her laugh, her habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she's nervous, of how easily she trusts the people she loves. I imagined her somewhere across the city, completely unaware that something toxic had already crossed the threshold of her life. I folded the paper again. My hands were shaking now. I told myself I would put it back, forget I'd seen it, breathe. But the air felt wrong, sharp, artificial, like it had already been filtered too many times. That's when the door opened behind me, not him, my husband. He took in the room in a single glance, the paper in my hand, my face, my stillness. His expression didn't change the way I expected. No shock, no confusion. Just irritation, controlled, precise, and unsettlingly calm. "You shouldn't be in here," he said. That was it. Not "what is that?" Not "are you okay?" Just a correction. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to warn him, but he was already reaching into his pocket. That's when I understood. This wasn't discovery. This was containment. And the house, the rain, the silence, they had all been preparing for something far worse than the truth. I didn't know yet that this moment, the paper, the rain, his calm voice, was the last second of my life before I became the problem they needed to erase. He didn't ask me to hand over the paper. He didn't need to. My husband has always believed authority works best when it assumes compliance. He crossed the room slowly, like a man stepping into a space he already owned, and took the folded sheet from my fingers without touching my skin. That detail mattered to him. I noticed everything now. "This stays here," he said, slipping it into an inside pocket of his jacket. "And so do you." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming. "You're acting like I found a bomb," I said. "This is medical. We need to talk to her. We need to get her tested." He exhaled through his nose, the way he does when a client disappoints him. "You're emotional," he replied. "That makes you unreliable." That was the moment the language changed. Not quarantine as protection, quarantine as definition. He stepped back and scanned the room, already reorganizing the future in his head. Windows, surfaces. Airflow, I could see it unfolding behind his eyes like a checklist. "You touched his belongings," he continued. "You were in this room alone. That means we treat you as exposed." "Treated by whom?" I asked. "You." He didn't answer. He pulled a small spray bottle from the counter and misted the air between us, light, almost gentle. The smell hit instantly, chemical, artificially bright. It burned my throat. "Don't move," he said. I stood there stunned as he wiped the doorknob, the light switch, the edge of the desk, each motion precise. Efficient, familiar. "You're overreacting," I whispered. "You're my husband." He finally looked at me then, really looked. And what I saw wasn't fear of illness, it was fear of exposure. "This is not about you," he said quietly. "This is about risk management." I was escorted, not asked, to the sunroom at the back of the house, the room everyone loves. Floor-to-ceiling glass, too much light, no privacy, a space designed to be seen but not heard. He placed clean clothes on a chair, plastic-wrapped, left the room without touching me, locked the door behind him. From the other side of the glass, he spoke like a man delivering instructions to a contractor. "You'll stay here until further notice. I'll bring food, disposable. You don't touch anything else. If you need something, you ask. And my daughter? I demanded. She's being handled. That phrase landed heavier than any accusation. I watched him walk away down the hall, already wiping his hands, already cleansing the space I had occupied. The house adjusted to my absence with terrifying ease. The rain intensified outside, tapping against the glass in irregular patterns. For the first time, I understood something vital. Isolation isn't enforced with locks. It's enforced with certainty. And my husband was very certain that I was now the thing that needed to be controlled. I didn't know how long he planned to keep me there, but as night fell and the lights stayed on outside my glass walls, I realized the sunroom wasn't temporary. It was a test, and I was failing it on purpose. Time behaves differently when you're being observed. In the sunroom, hours didn't pass, they hovered. Morning light slid across the glass walls and stalled there, as if unsure whether it was allowed inside. I slept in fragments, waking whenever the house shifted. A door closing, footsteps pacing, water running too long. He never knocked. Food appeared the way evidence does, carefully placed, undeniable, impersonal. A paper tray slid through the gap beneath the door. Bread without crusts. Fruit already peeled. Everything soft enough to require no knives. No glass, no metal. I noticed that immediately. When I spoke to him through the glass, my voice sounded distorted, thinner, like it didn't belong to me anymore. "You didn't answer my question," I said during one of his deliveries. "When do I see her?" He didn't look up from the gloves he was removing. "She doesn't need this right now." "Need what, her mother?" He paused at that, just long enough to feel deliberate. "She needs stability," he replied. "And you're not providing that." That was the second shift in language. The first was exposed. The second was unstable. By the second night, plastic appeared, clear sheets draped over furniture beyond the sunroom, catching the light like ice. I watched him move through the house in layers. Gloves, wipes, rules. The man I had lived with for decades now behaved like a stranger assigned to sanitize a crime scene. I started cataloging details because details are anchors. He cleaned areas I never touched. He avoided places he used to linger. He never once asked how I felt. Instead, he monitored. I realized the sunroom wasn't just containment, it was visibility. Anyone passing through the hall could see me. Sitting, waiting, behaving, I was on display. That's when the shame crept in. It didn't arrive loudly. It settled. I began questioning my movements, my breathing, the way I held my hands. I stopped pacing because it made him watch more closely. I lowered my voice. I apologized for things I hadn't done. The house adjusted again. Late on the third evening, I saw my son-in-law return. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. His confidence had collapsed inward, like a building stripped of its scaffolding. I expected gloves, distance. Fear, none came. My husband placed a hand on his shoulder. Through the glass, I watched them stand close, too close, whispering. Coordinated, whatever rules applied to me did not apply to him. Something cold settled in my chest. This wasn't about illness. This was about hierarchy. I pressed my palm against the glass, leaving a faint print. My skin looked normal. Alive, human, and yet I was the one being erased. That night, I stopped trying to convince him. Instead, I started watching the watchers. Because the house was speaking now, and it was telling me something didn't add up. I didn't yet know what they were hiding. But as I lay awake under the artificial light, listening to whispered conversations travel through the vents, I realized the truth wasn't outside my cage. It was already inside the house, breathing. On the fourth day, the house began telling stories about me. I heard them secondhand, through tone, through posture, through the way voices softened when they said my name as if it were something fragile that might crack if handled directly. "You don't need to worry," my husband said one afternoon, standing just outside the sunroom with his arms crossed. "She's resting." Resting had become a euphemism, like exposed, like unstable. I pressed my fingers into the wicker arm of the chair to remind myself that I was still solid. "I want to speak to her," I said. "Just for a minute." He shook his head slowly, rehearsed sympathy etched into his face. "She wouldn't understand what she's seeing right now. The doctors agree." I hadn't seen a doctor. No one had examined me. No one had taken blood or vitals or even asked my name. But already, an invisible panel had convened somewhere without my presence, and a conclusion had been reached. "You told them I'm sick," I said. He didn't deny it. I told them you were under stress, he replied. Which is true. You've been fixated. Fixated. Another word added to the chain. That evening, my daughter came home. I knew because the house changed temperature, because the cadence of footsteps shifted, because I felt hope rise so sharply it made me dizzy. I stood and waved through the glass. She didn't wave back. She looked at me like you look at a storm through a window, concerned, distant, already bracing for impact. My husband's hand rested lightly on her back, guiding her away before I could speak. Later, I heard her voice drifting down the hall. Is she dangerous? The question split something open inside me. No, he said gently, just confused, and confusion can be contagious if you don't manage it early. Contagious. That word again, repurposed, polished, weaponized. That night, I cried quietly so no one could accuse me of hysteria. I folded my blanket precisely. I sat still. I became the version of myself they wanted to see. Passive, manageable, small, but inside, something sharpened. I began noticing patterns. How my husband avoided mirrors. How my son-in-law never looked at the windows. How the cleaning intensified after certain conversations and not others. I realized something crucial then. They weren't afraid of infection. They were afraid of contradiction. The sunroom light never turned off. Sleep came in shallow bursts, interrupted by the hum of air filters and the soft scrape of wipes on surfaces I hadn't touched. This wasn't quarantine. It was rehearsal. They were practicing a future where my voice no longer existed. And if I didn't act soon, that future would become permanent. Not because I was locked in, but because everyone else had been taught to look away. I didn't yet know how far they planned to push me, but as I watched my reflection fade in the glass that night, I understood one thing with terrifying clarity. The next move wouldn't be about silence. It would be about disappearance. The fifth day was the day they stopped pretending I would return. It began quietly. No announcement. No argument, just subtraction. The sunroom door didn't open that morning. The food tray arrived later than usual, slid through the gap without a word. No check-in, no instructions. Even control, it seemed, no longer required explanation. That absence spoke louder than anything else. When my husband finally appeared, it was with purpose. He wasn't carrying wipes or gloves this time. He was holding paperwork. I've made arrangements, he said calmly, as if discussing travel plans. This situation has exceeded what we can manage privately. My heart didn't race. It sank. Arrangements for what? I asked. For you to get help, he replied. Professional help. He held the papers up to the glass so I could see the letterhead. Long words, official seals. The tone of certainty baked into every line. Observation, evaluation, temporary placement. You told them I was a danger, I said. I told them you were distressed, he corrected. And unpredictable, the final word. I laughed then, a short, broken sound that surprised both of us. You're building a case, I said. You've been doing it all along. He didn't deny it. He never does when denial isn't useful. This protects everyone, he said. You included. That's when I understood the brilliance of his plan. No force, no bruises, no locked doors, just documentation. By afternoon, the house had changed again. My belongings were missing, small things at first. My shoes, my books, my coat. It was like watching a photograph slowly erase a person from the edges inward. I tried speaking to my daughter when she passed the sunroom. She stopped, listened, hesitated. Dad says you're not thinking clearly, she said softly. What do you think? I asked. She didn't answer. That silence hurt more than any accusation. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the reflection in the glass grow dim as the lights outside were turned off one by one. The sunroom, once bright and admired, now felt like a waiting room no one planned to revisit. And yet, something unexpected happened. My fear began to thin, because fear requires uncertainty, and I finally had clarity. They weren't trying to save me. They were trying to finalize me. A neat ending, a diagnosis. A narrative where I was unstable and therefore irrelevant. I stood up and touched the glass deliberately. Left a full handprint this time, no wiping it away. They had underestimated one thing. They thought isolation would make me smaller. Instead, it had given me time. Time to observe. Time to remember. Time to understand how stories are built and how they can be dismantled. They were preparing to move me, which meant I had one remaining advantage. I was still inside the house. and somewhere beyond the sunroom walls, I knew there was a mistake they hadn't accounted for. Because the most dangerous thing you can give a woman you plan to erase is time to decide how she will reappear. Once they decided I was leaving, they stopped watching closely. That was their first mistake. Control breeds confidence, and confidence dulls attention. My husband began moving through the house like a man who believed the ending was already written. His voice softened, his steps slowed. He spoke on the phone more openly now, pacing the hall with the calm of someone who no longer feared interruption. "They'll take her tomorrow," I heard him say through the vents one evening. "It's cleaner this way, less disruption, cleaner." I began mapping the house in my head, not as a home, but as a system. Sound traveled through vents, floorboards betrayed weight, doors hesitated before closing fully. Patterns emerged when fear faded. The sunroom had been chosen for visibility, not security. The lock was symbolic. The real restraint was narrative, and narratives require witnesses. I started listening instead of speaking. Late at night, when the house thought itself asleep, I heard murmured conversations bleed through the walls. My husband and my son-in-law spoke in fragments, numbers, timelines, names I didn't recognize. Their voices were tired now. Strained. Whatever they were hiding was pressing harder. I noticed something else, too. My husband avoided touching certain surfaces: the study door, a cabinet near the stairs, a drawer in the hallway he always kept locked. I had lived in this house long enough to know its secrets. He assumed I no longer remembered. That night, I tested the door. The lock clicked open with embarrassing ease. Inside the study, the air felt different, stale, concentrated. The desk was immaculate, but the trash bin hadn't been emptied. I found receipts folded carefully, burner phone packaging, a clinic brochure with the corner torn off. Proof isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's boring and devastating. I took nothing, I moved nothing, I memorized everything. When I returned to the sunroom, my heart was steady. This wasn't panic anymore, it was preparation. The next morning, my daughter came alone. She stood outside the glass longer than usual, her eyes searching my face like she was trying to reconcile two competing images of me. "You're really going away?" she asked quietly. "Do you want me to?" I replied. She hesitated. That was enough. I leaned closer to the glass and lowered my voice. "Before anything happens," I said, "I need you to look at something. In the study, bottom drawer, don't tell him. Just look." Her eyes widened, not with fear but recognition. She nodded once. When she walked away, I felt something shift, not hope. Leverage. They believed the system would remove me neatly. They forgot that systems depend on silence, and silence is fragile once one person. The house didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. It wasn't fear keeping me awake anymore, it was anticipation. The kind that tightens your muscles and sharpens your hearing until every sound feels deliberate. At 2:14 a.m., I heard the study door open. At 2:16, it slammed shut. At 2:18, my husband's footsteps crossed the hallway too quickly, too unevenly. The rhythm was wrong. He wasn't calm anymore. He was improvising. That's how I knew my daughter had looked. Morning arrived with a brittle stillness. No food tray, no instructions, just the faint buzz of a phone vibrating somewhere beyond the sunroom. When he finally came, he didn't stand at a distance. He stood too close. "You've been talking to her," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've been her mother," I replied. His jaw tightened. I saw something pulse beneath his skin, rage restrained by calculation. "You don't understand the damage you're causing," he said. "She's upset, distracted. That's dangerous right now." "Dangerous to whom?" He looked away. That told me everything. The lie was unraveling, not explosively, but surgically. The kind of damage that can't be undone with denial because it lives in documentation, timestamps, inconsistencies. My daughter didn't come near the sunroom that day. Instead, she moved through the house like someone cataloging a crime scene. Quiet, methodical, touching things she had never noticed before. Asking questions that didn't sound accusatory, but weren't innocent either. My son-in-law avoided her. Avoidance is a confession when done poorly. By afternoon, voices rose, not shouting, worse. Controlled tension. Words sharpened by restraint. "You went through my things," my husband said. "You told me to trust you," my daughter replied. The air in the house thickened. I watched from the sunroom as power shifted rooms. The man who had managed every outcome was now reacting instead of directing. He paced, checked locks, cleaned obsessively again as if sterility could restore authority. It couldn't. Late that evening, my daughter came to the glass. She didn't hesitate this time. "You were right," she said, "about all of it." I nodded, no triumph, just relief. "They're lying," she continued, "and they're scared." "Yes," I said, "which means they'll move fast." She swallowed. "So will we." That was the first time she said we. The sunroom felt smaller then, not like a cage but like a threshold. Something I was about to cross, whether they allowed it or not. Because the truth had done its most dangerous work already. It had been seen. They thought tomorrow was my exit, but as night settled over the house and I watched my husband lock doors that had never needed locking before, I realized the real escape was about to happen without me going anywhere at all. Morning came without ceremony. No knock, no tray, no warning. Instead, the house filled with sound, voices overlapping, drawers opening too hard, footsteps moving without pattern. The kind of noise that means decisions are being made too quickly. I stood in the sunroom and waited. When my husband finally appeared, he wasn't alone. My daughter stood behind him, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. That steadiness frightened him more than any accusation could have. "We need to talk," she said. He opened his mouth to answer for both of us. She cut him off. "No," she said. "You don't get to narrate this." Silence fell like a dropped plate. She turned to me then, really turned, no glass, no distance, no hesitation. "Mom," she said, "tell me everything, from the beginning, and don't soften it." So I didn't. I spoke carefully. Chronologically, I described the paper, the shift in language, the way concern turned into control, the way my fear had been documented instead of addressed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I let the facts do what facts always do when allowed to exist. My husband paced behind her, rubbing his hands together as if friction might erase what was happening. "You're misremembering," he said finally. "That's what stress does. It reorganizes reality." My daughter turned slowly. "You taught me to spot manipulation," she said. "I learned it from watching you." That was the moment the house chose sides. The sunroom door opened, not ceremonially, not gently. Just opened, air rushed in, real air, unfiltered. Cold, I stepped out. My husband flinched not because I moved, but because I did so without permission. "I was trying to protect this family," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "From what?" my daughter asked. He couldn't answer, because protection requires a threat, and the only threat left was exposure. By afternoon, bags were being packed. Not mine, he argued logistics, consequences, reputation. He warned us about how messy truth could be. My daughter listened politely, then said, "Messy is better than poisoned." He left before sunset, not in disgrace, not in cuffs, just diminished. The house felt different immediately. Quieter but not empty. That night, I slept without lights on for the first time in days. No hum, no filters, just darkness and rain tapping softly against the windows. I wasn't free yet, but I was no longer contained. And that distinction mattered more than anything else. I believed the worst was over. But as I lay awake listening to the rain reclaim the silence, I didn't yet know what leaving behind a lie actually costs, or how hard the truth would fight to stay standing once it was finally spoken. Truth doesn't arrive like justice. It arrives like silence. The morning after he left, the house felt larger but strangely unfinished, like a set after the actors have gone home. Doors stayed open. No one wiped surfaces that didn't need wiping. The air smelled like rain and wood and something faintly human again. My daughter moved through the rooms slowly, barefoot, as if relearning the space. Every so often she would stop, stare at nothing in particular, and then continue. Grief doesn't always cry, sometimes it inventories. "I keep thinking I'll hear his keys," she said quietly from the kitchen. "You might," I replied. Memory is persistent. We didn't discuss what would happen next. Naming consequences makes them real, and neither of us was ready for the weight of that reality yet. Lawyers, statements, questions that wouldn't come from concern, but from curiosity sharpened into suspicion. The world would want an explanation. But the truth doesn't always translate cleanly once it leaves the room where it was discovered. By afternoon, the first calls came. Friends, colleagues, voices softened by gossip disguised as care. I heard something happened, they said. Something had happened, but not something easily summarized. My daughter took most of the calls. She shielded me without announcing that she was doing so. That, more than anything, told me she had crossed an invisible line, out of childhood, out of denial, into agency. Still, the house remembered. I found a pair of gloves in a drawer I hadn't opened in years. A folded instruction sheet taped inside a cabinet. A note in my husband's handwriting listing supplies he never explained. Evidence of a life lived in preparation for fear. That night, I dreamed of being sealed into a room without doors. I woke gasping, my heart racing, my hands searching for glass that wasn't there. Trauma doesn't leave when danger does. It waits to see if it's safe. In the days that followed, my daughter began asking questions, not about him, but about me. Who was I before? What did I want? What did I give up without noticing? Those questions were harder than any accusation, because survival has a way of shrinking your imagination. One evening, as the rain returned in earnest, she said, "We can sell the house." The suggestion startled me, not because I disagreed, but because I hadn't realized how badly I wanted to leave. "Yes," I said, "we can." Outside, the city lights blurred into long streaks of color on wet pavement. Somewhere beyond this hill, life was continuing without knowledge of what had collapsed here, and that was both comforting and terrifying, because collapse is loud only to those inside it. Later that night, as I locked my door, I felt something settle that wasn't peace, but wasn't fear either. Resolve, maybe. The truth had burned through our lives, but fire doesn't just destroy, it clears. And standing in the quiet after, I understood something essential. Leaving a cage doesn't mean you're free. It means you now have to decide who you are without it. I thought the story ended when he walked out. But as the house slept and the rain kept falling, the last thing we packed wasn't furniture. It was silence. The kind that lingers in corners long after the words have left. The kind that reminds you where you once learned to shrink yourself in order to survive. The house emptied slowly. Each room gave something back. Books I hadn't opened in years, photographs framed by someone else's version of our life, objects chosen to impress rather than comfort. With every box sealed, I felt lighter, not because I was shedding weight, but because I was shedding permission. Permission I had never realized I was granting. On the final morning, I walked through the sunroom one last time. The glass was clean now. No fingerprints, no reflections distorted by fear, just rain tracing honest lines downward, indifferent to who watched. I didn't hate that room anymore. It had taught me something vital. Visibility without voice is still a cage. My daughter waited by the door, keys in hand. "Ready?" she asked. I looked back once, not at the house, but at the woman I had been inside it. The one who measured her words carefully, who mistook endurance for virtue, who believed love required silence. "I am," I said. We didn't leave dramatically. No final confrontation, no audience. Just a door closing behind us with a sound that felt ordinary and therefore revolutionary. In the weeks that followed, life didn't magically settle. There were legal conversations, explanations I chose not to give, relationships that faded when they realized I wouldn't package my experience into something comfortable. That was fine. Comfort had cost me too much already. Instead, I learned new rhythms, morning walks without apology, conversations where I didn't soften the truth to keep peace, laughter that came without checking whether it was appropriate. My daughter changed too, stronger, quieter, no longer asking for permission to doubt what didn't make sense. One night, months later, rain returned, heavy, insistent, familiar. We sat together in our new place, windows cracked open, letting it in. "It used to scare me," she said, "how fast things can collapse." "They don't collapse," I replied. "They reveal." That's what I finally understood. Nothing had been taken from me that wasn't already hollow. What I kept was more important. My voice, my instincts, my name spoken without caution. I am no longer defined by what I endured, or what I escaped, or what someone tried to erase. I am defined by what I chose to reclaim. And if the rain ever comes back the way it did before, pressing, haunting, unrelenting, I won't mistake it for danger again. Rain doesn't wash you away. It shows you what was always strong enough to remain.